They showed up on my doorstep at precisely noon on a Tuesday, wearing crisp polo shirts emblazoned with a generic emblem that read HOA Enforcer. Their cheap plastic badges gleamed in the midday sun, and their stern faces might have intimidated someone unfamiliar with real law enforcement. But I'm a U.S. Marshal. I spotted the charade from a mile away. I kept my expression neutral as I answered the door, leaning casually against the frame. You'd think a couple of guys claiming to be the neighborhood protection detail, whatever that meant, would do a better job looking the part. Their stance, their radio protocol, the way they scanned the environment, it all screamed amateur hour. I had to bite back a smirk. Sir, we're here to inform you that you're in violation of HOA Code 22, subsection C, the taller man said stiffly. He fumbled for a piece of paper, acting as though it were an arrest warrant. We need you to come with us. I eyed him, then the paper, then his partner, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else but there. HOA Code 22, subsection C? I asked, forcing confusion into my voice. Mind telling me what that is? The shorter one cleared his throat. Why, yes, it pertains to excessive noise and unapproved modifications to your property. It's all listed here. He tapped the paper with a ballpoint pen that bore the name of a local pizza joint. This is official business. Official business. I fought off a grin. For someone who was used to real criminals and real danger, this was almost laughable, except for how far these guys were willing to go. I couldn't help but wonder who sent them. I had an inkling. Karen Rhodes, my overbearing neighbor who seemed to have an unnatural fixation on everyone else's business. From the moment I moved in 2 months ago, I'd received a mountain of friendly reminders about lawn maintenance, mailbox design, and even the length of my weekly grocery trips. She'd been at my door with a casserole the day after I moved in, under the guise of a warm welcome, and then spent the next hour grilling me about everything from my prior residences to the reason I chose this neighborhood. 2 months later, her nuisance factor had soared off the charts. She had an uncanny ability to impose rules that, as far as I could tell, didn't actually exist on the official HOA documentation. Every time I checked, the guidelines were unremarkable. Keep the yard tidy, no disruptive construction, be mindful of shared community spaces. Yet Karen acted as if she had the authority of a small-town mayor and the reach of an intelligence agency. I stepped out onto the porch, letting the screen door creak behind me. You're saying you have the authority to detain me for excessive noise and property modifications? The taller man nodded, stepping forward. We do. If you resist, the HOA can press charges. He actually took out what looked like plastic handcuffs from his belt. The entire scene felt so surreal, I half expected hidden cameras to pop out. If I didn't know better, I'd have thought this was some elaborate prank. But one look at their unwavering expressions told me they believed their own hype, or at least wanted me to believe it. I sighed. Gentlemen, let's clarify something here. I'm Manny Chavez. I've already read the official HOA guidelines. Nowhere does it say I can be taken in over a code violation. Besides, who exactly put you up to this? They seemed taken aback by my calm. The shorter man exchanged a glance with the taller one, then shrugged. We don't answer to you. Are you going to come with us, or will we have to escalate? He tried, and failed, to sound threatening. It was like watching a third-rate stage performance of a bad cop show. Ordinarily, I would have ended the charade right there by showing my U.S. Marshal credentials. However, I'd been through enough training scenarios to know the value of letting people reveal themselves fully before I played my hand. So instead, I nodded slowly and glanced up and down the street. My quiet suburban road was virtually deserted. People around here rarely left their air-conditioned homes before dinner time. Good. No reason to turn this into a public spectacle. All right, I said, crossing my arms. Take me away. There was a flicker of discomfort in the taller man's eyes. Maybe he realized how ridiculous it was to try and slap plastic cuffs on someone bigger than both of them. But they'd come this far, so he reached forward to seize my wrist. The plastic rattled softly. Actually, I continued, lowering my voice, I have a feeling your boss might want to talk to me in private before you do something irreversible. You sure you want to keep going? He froze mid-move, glancing at his partner. A mild panic set in. Boss? He echoed, as if the idea of someone pulling the strings behind the scenes was beyond him. I shrugged. The lady who rules this HOA with an iron fist, who's probably behind this entire fiasco, Karen Rhodes. Right? He sputtered something inaudible. I tilted my head, letting a small smile creep across my face. It's all right, fellas. If you're going to impersonate law enforcement, you might want to study more than 10 minutes worth of old cop shows. That was the moment my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at it. The call was from an unknown number. My instincts told me that if I took it, the show might unravel right then and there, so I ignored it. Let's do this, I said, gesturing to my driveway. Your squad car out there? We've got a community patrol vehicle, the taller one snapped, bristling. It's a golf cart, technically, but outfitted with official signage. I bit back a laugh. Lead the way. But if I were you, I'd text Ms. Rhodes and let her know I'll be dropping by to clarify this matter. I paused, stepping into a pair of sneakers I'd left on the porch. Now, do I get a ride in the front seat, or am I in the back? I wouldn't want to break any HOA regulations, after all. It was a line delivered with complete deadpan. Their bewildered expressions told me they had no idea how to respond. The smaller guy fidgeted, then mumbled something about me needing to be in the back. Meanwhile, the taller one tried to maintain an air of authority. You don't get to call the shots, buddy. I hid my amusement. After all, this was just the beginning. Karen Rhodes was about to discover that messing with a U.S. Marshal, albeit unwittingly, was a game with far higher stakes than petty noise complaints. The HOA police vehicle turned out to be a golf cart, as promised. White, with a poorly affixed decal that read Stonewood Estate Security. On either side were cheap LED lights that blinked a weak red and blue. It was surreal to climb into the back seat of that thing, acting like I was in custody. At least they didn't actually try to use those plastic cuffs on me. After a glance at my broad shoulders, they'd wisely decided to just let me cooperate. As we drove the 100 yards down the road to Karen's house, it was literally just a few houses away. I noticed how meticulously everyone's lawn was manicured, including my own. I had always kept up with property maintenance, but apparently that wasn't enough for Karen. Rumor had it she'd championed an amendment to the bylaws requiring the exact shade of green for lawns. Maybe just a suburban legend, but it wouldn't have surprised me if it were true. We parked in her driveway. Her two-story brick house, with symmetrical flower beds and a little American flag by the mailbox, looked like a model home. Even the welcome mat read, "Kindness lives here," which struck me as painfully ironic. The taller fake officer marched up to the front door and rang the bell. A few seconds later, Karen appeared. She was in her early 50s, with immaculate makeup, short, styled blonde hair, and a pressed floral blouse that spoke of a life dedicated to country club brunches. She eyed me, and a thin, satisfied smile curled on her lips. "Good afternoon, Ms. Rhodes," I greeted, channeling a polite southern drawl I'd picked up on an assignment years ago. No reason to tip my hand just yet. Seems I'm in trouble. Karen brushed imaginary lint from her blouse and gave me a pitying look. "Oh, Manny. You really thought you could bring your chaotic lifestyle into our peaceful community? This is Stonewood Estates, not some freewheeling campsite." I arched an eyebrow. "Chaotic lifestyle? Could you clarify?" She gestured for me to step inside, ignoring my question. The interior of her home was as meticulous as its exterior. Cream-colored walls, polished hardwood floors, and furniture arranged in perfect right angles. The air smelled faintly of fresh lavender. The two officers hovered near the entrance, as though waiting for instructions. Karen led me to her formal living room, where a high-back couch and two plush armchairs faced a coffee table stacked with glossy issues of local real estate magazines. She settled into one of the armchairs, crossing her legs elegantly. "Sit," she commanded. I took the couch, glancing at the men. They were standing awkwardly, like bouncers who weren't quite sure if they should remain. Karen waved them off. "Why don't you two wait outside? I'll handle Mr. Chavez on my own." They stepped out, looking relieved to be away from the charade. I waited until the front door clicked shut before turning to Karen, adopting a more direct tone. "So, you mind explaining why you sent a couple of pretend cops to arrest me? I'm afraid I'm not following the logic." Karen's eyes flashed. "Call them what you like, but around here, Those men have authority. This neighborhood is a private community with an elected board. I happen to be the president of said board. If you violate the established rules, we have the right to enforce them. I nodded, all business. I've read the bylaws, Ms. Rhodes. Nothing in them grants you the right to detain anyone, especially not with plastic handcuffs. Her smile was slow and condescending. We have broad discretion. If you'd read more carefully, you'd see that repeated noncompliance can lead to more severe measures. I was tempted to bring up the real criminal charges that come from impersonating an officer, but I held back. Let's suppose I'm in violation. I'd like to know exactly what that violation is. And also, how you think you can justify your little neighborhood enforcers. She smoothed her blouse. Excessive noise, Manny. People around here are used to quiet living. You've had some interesting visitors late at night, haven't you? Her eyebrows arched accusingly. Cars coming and going at all hours. Alarms from your garage? That's not how we do things. She must be referring to the times my colleagues from the Marshal's office swung by to discuss case details. Or when I tested some new security gear in my garage. Of course, she had no idea about my real line of work. I keep my personal business discreet, I said calmly. I've had a few late-night deliveries, but nothing that merits a phony arrest. So what's this really about? Karen's lips thinned. She was silent a moment, as though debating how much to reveal. We have a high standard here. Stonewood Estates has a reputation to uphold. Your activities, whatever they are raising eyebrows. And since I, as HOA president, am charged with keeping our community safe and tranquil, I'm simply taking precautions. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. I know you're hiding something, Manny. You might have fooled the local sheriff's department, but not me. I have connections. I know you have out-of-state ties, no family around here, nobody truly vouching for you. Who's to say you're not a threat to our neighborhood? A criminal, even? I had to will myself not to laugh. So this was all a misguided attempt to flush out what she assumed was a shady past. The irony was too rich. If she only knew how many background checks I'd undergone. Your concern is noted, I replied evenly. But I'm not a criminal. In fact, I'd be happy to prove it, if necessary. She cocked her head. Go on. I can provide documentation that I've passed numerous federal screenings. I offered. My voice was steady. No need for theatrics. I have a very clean record, but I suspect that wouldn't solve this issue, would it? Because the real problem here is that I didn't bend to your idea of how to live. Karen shrugged, her painted nails tapping the armchair. This community is about uniformity. When people break from that uniformity, it creates cracks. And cracks, Manny, can bring down an entire structure. So either you adhere to the rules, or you find somewhere else to live. I stared at her, measuring her resolve. She was serious. But you see, I said at last, I'm not moving, and I won't be intimidated by your enforcers. Her eyes narrowed. Is that so? Indeed, I said. In fact, this conversation makes me think you might be stepping into some legal trouble yourself. Impersonating an officer, unlawful detainment. Those are real charges, Ms. Rhodes. She sat up straighter. Are you threatening me? I spread my hands. I'm informing you. There's a difference. For a moment, she seemed rattled. Then she regained her composure, offering a slow, cunning smile. You can't scare me. We're neighbors, after all. And let's not forget, I watch everything that happens on this street, Manny. It would be a shame if your late-night activities became the talk of the town. People might start making phone calls, asking questions about who you really are. I returned her gaze, unblinking. That might not end how you expect. Her silence told me she caught the warning in my voice, but she dismissed it with a small wave of her hand, standing up to signal the conversation was over. We'll see about that. Until then, I strongly advise you to keep your head down. I'm sure those nice men from the HOA detail will be more than happy to keep an eye on you. I rose from the couch. They can watch all they want. As I left, a thought nagged at me. If Karen was this intent on policing my life now, how far would she push if she actually discovered the truth about my job? I glanced at her front yard, noticing a new security camera perched discreetly above her porch. The red light winked at me as if in warning. I walked back home on foot, ignoring the golf cart and its fumbling officers. Part of me wanted to do a quick check of my property, just to be sure Karen or her minions hadn't planted anything suspicious. I wasn't paranoid by nature, but I'd seen enough borderline harassment cases to know how lines could be crossed. Once inside my house, I called my boss at the local U.S. Marshal's field office, Assistant Chief Deputy June Carlisle. June was a savvy, no-nonsense leader who'd worked multiple high-profile cases. She picked up on the second ring. "Chavez, what's up?" she asked in her brisk manner. "You're not supposed to be in until next week. You were on some well-deserved downtime, right?" I glanced around my living room, speaking in a low voice. "Yes, ma'am, but we've got a situation in my neighborhood." I explained the bizarre confrontation, leaving out unnecessary details, but conveying the gist. My overbearing HOA president had apparently decided to organize her own private security force, complete with phony arrests. "They tried to detain me," I added. "I'm concerned about the legality of it all, and it could escalate if they find out who I am." To her credit, June only allowed a slight pause before replying. "Sound like a headache, Manny. Typically, we'd refer local HOA disputes to the local police, but impersonating law enforcement is a federal issue, too. You sure you want to blow your cover? Because once you do, you'll never live in peace out there." I sighed. I was hoping to avoid that. My plan was to keep my occupation quiet in the neighborhood, to keep a low profile. But Karen's not the type to let things go. June made a non-committal sound. "Keep me in the loop. If you think they're crossing federal lines or putting you in danger, we'll handle it. Otherwise, it might be best to do some community relations of your own. See if you can get them to stand down." After hanging up, I considered my options. The last thing I wanted was to cause a media circus in Stonewood Estates. But if Karen insisted on playing cop, she'd eventually step on the wrong toes. The question was how to rein her in without torpedoing my quiet suburban life. First, I set about doing a thorough sweep of my property. I found no hidden cameras or devices yet. My doorbell camera's footage revealed the HOA Enforcers loitering by my mailbox earlier in the morning, seemingly waiting for me to emerge. And that unknown call I'd missed earlier? Turned out it was from a local attorney's office, someone named Patricia Collins, who left a voicemail stating she represented the Stonewood Estates HOA and wanted to discuss compliance matters. I didn't bother calling back right away. I had a feeling we'd be crossing paths soon enough. By evening, I decided to walk my dog, Holly, around the neighborhood. She was an old Labrador mix, graying around the muzzle, but still sprightly enough to enjoy a stroll. As I passed by other homes, I caught glimpses of neighbors peering out their curtains. Word traveled fast in small communities. A few folks offered polite waves, but it all felt guarded. Karen likely had them convinced I was some shady character with a rap sheet. A husky man in a baseball cap was trimming his hedges out front. When he noticed me, he gave a small nod. "Hey, name's Nick," he said. "You must be Manny." I paused, letting Holly sniff at his mailbox post. "That's right. Good to meet you." He shoved his hedge trimmer under one arm. "I'm on the HOA board, but I don't support these stunts," he confided, lowering his voice. "I heard about what happened with those guys earlier. Just know that not all of us are on Karen's warpath." I felt a flicker of relief. "Thanks for saying that. Mind if I ask how she got so much power?" Nick let out a long breath. "She's got half the neighborhood convinced that property values depend on her micromanaging everything. Plus, she's done favors for people, arranged deals with contractors, that kind of thing. Now, they owe her. The rest are either scared or indifferent." I scratched behind Holly's ears, pondering Nick's words. "Is it true she's got a private security detail?" Nick grimaced. "She hires these off-duty rent-a-cops from some small outfit outside town. Pays them under the table, I hear. I think most folks assume they're legit. But I'm starting to question that myself." "Listen," he continued, glancing around like he was worried someone might overhear. "She once tried to get a neighbor's adult son taken in for loitering at his own parents' house. It didn't stick, but she's ruthless. So I've gathered," I said, exhaling. I thanked him for the intel, and we parted ways. It was good to know Karen wasn't universally adored. Maybe there was a path to dismantling her little empire from within. The challenge, doing so without blowing my own cover. When I returned home, Holly in tow, I found a glossy pamphlet under my welcome mat. On the front, it read, Stonewood Estates, preserving our community's dignity. Inside were bullet points about how to report suspicious activity. The final page listed a phone number to call in case of violation. Next to the phone number was an image of a gold star reminiscent of a sheriff's badge. Right there, I made a decision. Enough was enough. I walked into my study and opened my filing cabinet, rummaging for the official case files from my last assignment. My mind churned with possibilities. Maybe I could show Karen that I had the backing of real authority, impress upon her that she was messing with the wrong person. But that might just escalate things. Then a new idea occurred to me. If Karen wanted to play police, maybe I could give her a taste of actual law enforcement procedures by discreetly investigating her little operation. I'd do it the way I would any suspect: gather intel, build a file, and prepare a quiet takedown if necessary. Because if she was actively paying people to impersonate officers, that was a federal offense. I locked up my documents and decided I'd start small. I questioned the so-called enforcers, figure out their real identities, gather proof that they were impersonating police with Karen's full knowledge. Then, if push came to shove, I'd drop the hammer. No need to blow my identity prematurely. After all, a good marshal knows when to remain undercover and when to come out guns blazing. Little did I know, Karen had more up her impeccably tailored sleeves than I anticipated. The next afternoon, I staked out my own street from the second-floor bedroom window, waiting for the HOA detail to make their rounds. It didn't take long. Around 3 o'clock, the golf cart rattled by, driven by the same 2 men from before. They stopped in front of an older couple's house 2 doors down. One guy climbed out, marched up to the door, and left a notice. They conversed with the resident for a few minutes, then resumed their slow patrol. I slipped outside and casually crossed the street, heading in their direction. One of the men, tall, with a perpetual scowl, noticed me coming and tensed. "Can we help you?" he called out, placing a hand on the walkie-talkie at his hip. The device looked almost like a toy, but he handled it as if it were a lifeline. I approached, arms raised in a non-threatening gesture. "Didn't mean to startle you," I said. "Just wanted to clarify yesterday's incident." He exchanged a glance with his partner, the shorter man who seemed more uncertain than aggressive. "It's all in the report," the tall guy responded curtly. "We had probable cause to take you in for violating community rules." I nearly smiled at the phrase probable cause, but kept my expression neutral. "Let's put that aside for now. I'm sure Ms. Rhodes informed you I'm not exactly an easy target." I paused, waiting for them to confirm. The tall man just pressed his lips together, while the shorter man looked away. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. My name's Manny Chavez. I'd like to know who I'm dealing with." "That fair?" The shorter one glanced up. "I'm Dave." "He's Rick," he mumbled, jerking a thumb at his partner. "Dave and Rick," I repeated, offering a friendly nod. "You guys part of a legitimate security firm or something? Because if you are, I might need some private security myself for my job. Could be good business for you." That got their attention. Rick frowned, curiosity flickering across his face. "We're contracted. Stonewood Protective Services." I wanted to laugh at the improvised name, but I feigned interest. "Oh yeah? Heard good things about you guys. Karen told me you've got a track record of handling issues in the neighborhood. Any chance I can see your credentials?" They stiffened, sharing a look. Dave cleared his throat. "We don't carry them on us. Company policy. Ms. Rhodes handles the official documentation," which was probably code for "we don't have any credentials." I cocked my head. Odd policy. Usually a private security firm would have licensing, especially if you're performing law enforcement duties. Rick bristled. "We're well within our rights, buddy. Unless you want to keep talking and get cited for harassment." "Harassment?" I echoed, injecting a slight edge into my voice. "Sounds like you're the ones harassing folks. But that's neither here nor there." I gave him a small shrug, as if I were giving up. "All right, boys, have it your way. I'll see you around." As I turned to leave, I caught Dave's uneasy expression. Something told me the wheels in his head were spinning. Maybe he suspected that I wasn't just another pushover. If they truly had no legal authority, they had to know they were on dangerous ground. Back home, I documented the brief encounter in a notebook, jotting down the time, date, descriptions, and any key phrases they used. The next step was to keep building a file, piece by piece. Over the following days, I observed the patrols, noting which homes they visited and how they interacted with the residents. I also discreetly asked around, chatting up neighbors like Nick, who fed me tidbits about how these guys would sometimes threaten fines or claim they had the power to do citizens' arrests for minor infractions. One evening, I spotted Karen herself out in her yard, sipping from a travel mug while watching the patrol in action. She looked entirely pleased with herself, as if surveying her personal kingdom. It was almost comical if it weren't so blatantly illegal. A week passed, and tensions seemed to simmer. I avoided overt confrontation, preferring to gather proof. But evidently Karen had run out of patience. Late Friday afternoon, I stepped out to retrieve my mail and found a thick envelope shoved into the box. It wasn't official mail, no postage, just my name scrawled on the front. Inside was a typed letter on Stonewood Estates letterhead, demanding I appear at an HOA disciplinary hearing for continued disruption of community peace and defiance of compliance protocols. It stated that I was subject to immediate removal from the premises, which sounded like a barely veiled threat of eviction. Of course, they had no legal standing to do that, but I guess they hoped I'd either surrender or panic. I scanned the rest of the letter. The hearing was scheduled for the next day at the community center. No time to gather allies. Clearly their tactic was to corner me quickly. Fine. Let them try. The next afternoon, I arrived at the community center, a modest building near the entrance of Stonewood Estates. Its small auditorium was packed with a surprising number of residents, most wearing expressions of curiosity or apprehension. At the head of the room sat Karen, flanked by 3 other HOA board members and, of course, her 2 officers. A hush fell as I entered. Karen pointed to a lone chair facing the board's table. "Mr. Chavez, please be seated," she announced, voice dripping with false civility. I remained standing, scanning the crowd. Nick was there off to the side, giving me a subtle nod of encouragement. "Let's not waste time," Karen said, flipping through a stack of papers. "We have evidence of repeated noise violations, suspicious activity, and even harassment of our neighborhood security." I folded my arms. "You mean Dave and Rick? The guys posing as law enforcement?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's eyes flashed. "They are employed by Stonewood Estates to maintain order. That is perfectly within our rights." "Actually," I said, stepping forward, "I have reason to believe they're impersonating officers without proper licensing. That's a federal crime. Care to prove otherwise?" Karen slammed her papers on the table. "This is a hearing, not a courtroom. If you want to present evidence, you may do so. But understand we have full authority to impose sanctions, including fines, property liens, and eventual foreclosure proceedings if you remain non-compliant." I heard someone gasp in the audience. Foreclosure? She was bluffing, but for the average homeowner, that threat was terrifying. Before I could respond, Karen nodded to Dave and Rick. They flanked me, one on each side, as if about to pounce. "All right," I said quietly. "You want evidence? Here's some." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out my credentials, the badge I'd carried for years. The gold shield gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "My name is Manny Chavez. I'm a deputy U.S. Marshal." A stunned silence fell over the room. Karen's face paled, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Dave and Rick backed away instantly, as if I'd pulled out a live hand grenade. I continued in a calm, measured tone. "I've spent the last few weeks documenting the behavior of your so-called security force, accumulating proof of impersonation, harassment, and unlawful threats. I have records, photos, and witness statements." I nodded toward Nick, who lifted his phone as if to confirm. "That's enough to land you, Ms. Rhodes, and your hired goons in very serious legal trouble." Karen found her voice at last. Why didn't you just say so from the start?" she sputtered. This is just a misunderstanding." A ripple of chatter swept through the room. People leaned toward each other, whispering with alarm or glee. I couldn't tell which. Karen's board members looked shell-shocked, like they were seconds from jumping ship. "A misunderstanding?" I repeated softly. "Ms. Rhodes, you specifically instructed these men to detain me. You've threatened me with removal from my own property. That's not a simple misunderstanding. It's intimidation and unlawful practice of authority. She stood, face rigid. We believed you were a danger to the community. You never told us your occupation. What were we supposed to think? That's no excuse, I said. I'm a law-abiding citizen, and I don't have to disclose my profession just to live in this neighborhood. But even if I were a private individual without federal credentials, you have no right to orchestrate what amounts to false arrest. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. She tried, her voice breaking with desperation. We've had incidents. I was doing what I thought was best. I let silence linger, letting her squirm. Then I addressed the crowd. To the residents of Stonewood Estates, I'm sorry this is happening. I came here to live a quiet life. I'm sure most of you did too. But Ms. Rhodes has overstepped in a dangerous and illegal way. Sensing the tide turning, Dave and Rick both inched toward the exit, as if they might slip out and vanish. I gave him a pointed look. You two might want to stay put. Local law enforcement will want a word about those badges and the claims you've made. They froze, resigned to the fact that their hustle was over. Karen sank in her chair, shoulders trembling. Gone was the arrogant tyrant who'd threatened my peace. In her place sat a cornered figure who realized she'd rolled the dice against the wrong person. As for the rest of the board members, they stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Someone in the audience muttered, "Knew she was off her rocker." Another whispered, "She's done for now." I took a breath and directed my attention back to Karen. I'm willing to resolve this peacefully, but that means disbanding your fake security force immediately, ceasing all harassment, and issuing a formal apology to every resident affected by your tactics. She lifted her head, eyes glistening with tears of rage or fear, maybe both. "If I agree," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "will you let me be?" I inclined my head. "As long as you follow the actual HOA bylaws. No more made-up rules. No more impersonation. If not, I'll ensure the federal charges come down on you harder than a gavel in the Supreme Court." Karen nodded, defeated. The crowd erupted in tense murmurs. People were already pulling out phones, likely to record this spectacle for posterity or call neighbors who hadn't shown up. I stepped away from the table and made my way through the throng. Nick caught my arm as I passed. "I thought you might pull something like that," he said, a grin flickering on his face. "Couldn't have happened to a more deserving person. Thanks for stopping her, Manny." I nodded. "For all our sakes, I hope she learns from this." Yet I had a feeling she'd always harbor resentment. Some personalities don't change easily. But at least Stonewood Estates would no longer be under her iron grip. If there were any further attempts at intimidation, I'd be ready. Within the hour, local police arrived to question Karen's security detail. Dave and Rick admitted they'd been contracted under false pretenses. They never had a real security license. Karen apologized profusely, for the record, as she was led to a patrol car for questioning. For all her tears, I suspected it was the fear of jail time that truly broke her. In the weeks that followed, the HOA board restructured. Karen was forced to resign from her presidency, though she remained a homeowner, albeit a very subdued one. I continued to enjoy my quiet suburban life, nodding politely to neighbors who now greeted me with friendly respect. No more suspicious stares, no more midnight patrols. Sometimes, while mowing my lawn or walking Holly, I catch a glimpse of Karen peering through her window, wearing a haunted expression that hinted at lingering regret. And in those moments, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. She was so desperate to control everything that she'd lost sight of the community she claimed to protect. But mostly, I felt relief. My home was mine again. The rightful authorities were in place, and the sham was over. After years of chasing fugitives across the country, I'd finally found peace in a suburban neighborhood. Ironically, by confronting a fake police force that tried to arrest me under bogus HOA rules. They called me Manny, the neighbor who put the Marshal in martial law around here. The story of how Karen sent her fake HOA police to arrest me might live on in Stonewood Estates lore for years to come. And whenever someone new moves onto the block, I like to greet them with a friendly smile and a quiet hint. Don't worry about the HOA. They're a lot more reasonable now. After all, I'm a U.S. Marshal. and no one tries to arrest a U.S. Marshal in his own front yard. At least, not more than once. The end.